But then you'd have to tell me what are your social concerns about schooling, because to justify public funding for elementary and secondary schools, surely there are social benefits that are worth paying for. Otherwise, no one should expect the government to pay for schools.
Well, you've raised a very good question, because in fact I have become increasingly doubtful whether there is any case for government funding of schools. But the argument has always been that you need people who can read, write, and do arithmetic, who have some knowledge of history and of the society, in order to have an educated citizenry in which a democracy can operate. And I think there's a great deal of sense to that.
Should we agree on ways of making decisions in the public sector? That is, should people have some notion that, in fact, we do have a system of government, that, in fact, we do debate issues,
yes,
ultimately we take votes on issues and work?
Tell me how that's related to being proficient in a foreign language.
Oh, well, the foreign language is one concern. In other words, that's a concern that I have.
But where does
that,
how is it justified?
The foreign
on the grounds
or knowledge of government processes?
Excuse me, I agree with you that you need some knowledge. And I agree that in any system in which the government is going to provide money for people to go to school, it is not inappropriate that they should specify certain minimum requirements in spending that money. And I would agree with you that one of those minimum requirements would be some knowledge of the mechanisms of government. But it certainly doesn't include proficiency in a foreign language, and yet that's what you're proud of.
But then what you say, that we're in agreement on the principles that we should specify certain criteria for schools, but on the other hand you're saying that parents should just have a choice of a school regardless of what it does.
No,
that's my understanding.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Could I interrupt? In the latter part of the 19th century, the schools were subsidized. In England, you could send the children anywhere you want, but the subsidy depended on how many children passed certain specific examinations. If 90% passed, you got a high subsidy. If 10% passed, you got a very low subsidy. You could have complete private, and many of these were church schools and private schools. You could have a very large degree of autonomy and a control of what is actually taught just by this examination. Very simple procedure.
Dr. Tulloch, don't we have exactly the opposite of that now? We now fund schools, schools that have disadvantaged students who may in fact not be doing well get more money.
Well, no, that would have been true in England too. The special problem of disadvantaged students is a very real one, and I don't think anybody feels that they should be treated exactly like students who aren't. The question really is the technical way of dealing with them, and that is not an easy question. He's an educator. Let him answer that one.
But I want to go back to this other question. You can provide, the government can provide money without producing the product on which the money is spent. In fact, most of its money is spent that way. Yeah. The government gives people food stamps with the requirement that it be used to buy only food. But the government doesn't run the grocery stores in which they buy the food. There is no contradiction between saying we give a parent a voucher, which may be used only for buying education in schools which satisfy these minimum requirements. There's no contradiction between that and saying that schools may be privately run. They may be run by churches, they may be run by corporations for profit, they may be run by nonprofit organizations of parents or what else.
Sure, as long as you set the common standards, and the question is this, if you set the common standards high enough, you're going to get schools precisely like the present ones. You won't even allow public choice among schools.
Wait. You set the standards high enough, you'll get schools like our present ones? I would say if you set them low enough, you'll get schools like our present ones.
In terms, not the specific criteria, what I'm saying is if you set them in great enough detail.
If you insist that they must be able to read, you'll get a different kind of school.
For example, I hear you talking about perhaps a national examination, and yet what we're hearing is that we ought to have choice.
No, I would disagree with that. I disagree very much with
he and I don't always agree on everything, even if we're both wearing Adam Smith ties.
No, I get very confused by this because people like Bill Bennett and like Alan Bloom and E.D. Hirsch talk about we need a common culture and we need to get greater common content in schools, and they even talk about a national curriculum and national examinations.
But after all, Bill Bennett was Secretary of Education. I do not expect the Secretary of Education to be in favor of private schools any more than I expect the Postmaster General to be in favor of giving up the monopoly of distributing mail.
But yet he is. He feels that he is in favor of private schools, and he certainly is in favor of choice between the public and private sector.
Yes, he is in favor of choice between them, I agree. But, of course, the problem is what we mean by high standards. I believe that marketplace produces higher standards than government does in every area. I don't know any area The marketplace produces higher standards in delivering mail, as we have found out from Federal Express and from the other private mail companies, than the government does. The marketplace, if left to itself, if not hindered, if not restricted too much, will produce higher standards in schools. That's why I want them. That's why I'm in favor of the marketplace.
Let me ask you a question then. In a recent period, 34% of the babies born in San Francisco General Hospital, which as you know is the largest public hospital in San Francisco, were crack-addicted babies. Tell me about their parents and how they'll make educational choices for their children and in the interest of their children.
Could I ask if they make educational choices by voting for the school board, would it be just as bad?
Well, my concern right now is I do have an alternative. If you go to the Daniel Webster School, again, right here in the city, you'll find a school in the public sector with decentralized control and accountability with the largest gains in test scores this past year in the city of San Francisco. So I would maintain that reform is possible within the public sector. You need vast decentralization, and the only issue is whether that's possible politically, and I suspect we could discuss that.
Well, would these mothers, these children you were talking about, would they go to Daniel Webster?
Yeah, that's very important because, see, Daniel Webster is in the area where there is a public housing project, the Potrero Hills housing project, and it's precisely those neighborhoods that produce these crack-addicted babies. So
But I think
would the crack addict? You're concerned about the crack-addicted mother producing crack not being able to choose a private school. Why can she choose a public school?
Well, in this particular case, I think they're fortunate to be in that neighborhood where we've tried to start this kind of decentralized approach
Aren't you really
to accelerating
saying that,
education.
Aren't you really saying that the choice has been made for them and that you're therefore confident of that?
Not only has it been made for them, but I think it's a very good choice that's been made for them because these particular families are under tremendous stress and simply do not seem to place a high priority on educational decisions.
But I think the great defect in the kind of talk we're hearing from you is the attempt to treat 100% of the people one way because 5% of the people have to be treated differently. There are disadvantaged children like the crack babies. And as Gordon was saying before, they cannot be treated like everybody else. I quite agree. No question. But I would like to have a system in which 90% of the parents, that 90% which will make sense, which we do trust in every other way to be responsible for their children, that 90% has the greatest opportunity to provide their children with the kind of schooling that they will think will benefit their children most, and we have special treatment for the 10% falling out. Now, you take your public school or government school in San Francisco. Of course there are exceptions in the public school system. There always have been. We showed one in the film of the school outside Boston, which was a very good school for a different reason. The problem is they don't last. And the problem is that they cannot become general because there is no mechanism for getting rid of the bad schools. There's no effective accountability. And the only effective accountability you can have is the right of the customer to say, I won't buy or I will buy.
Let me ask another question, Dr. Friedman. What about the schools? Will they be required to take all children once the parents have made the choice?
No, not at all. Any more than restaurants are required to admit all customers.
Well, they are required to admit all customers on the basis of race.
Yes, I would in that case. Again, I'm saying that the use of the voucher can be contingent on certain requirements. And I think it is generally agreed that non-discrimination with respect to race would be one of them.